Everything you thought you knew about witches is about to change as you come face to face with a group of extraordinary women, both past and present, living and dead. Travel backwards in time to the beginnings of civilization and confront the true meaning of what we now call witchcraft. Experience the fiery terror of the burning times and discover shocking secrets long buried beneath the dust of the Middle Ages. Meet the modern-day pagans, keepers of a timeless legacy, as they explain their beliefs and share their ancient ceremonies, proudly reclaiming their title as witches. And learn how the calendar of the West still bears the imprint of their archaic religion. Tonight, on Lifetime, Witches, Daughters of the Goddess.
High on a mountain in Southern California, a group gathers to celebrate an ancient ritual marking the arrival of the summer solstice. They are modern-day followers of a spiritual pathway known as Wicca.
We call you, she who is known by the 10,000 names, Anu, Astarte, Morgan, Bridget.
Wicca is really a religious thing. It's the religion of the witch.
Shekinah, Yamaya, come and be here with us now.
Wicca meant to bend or to shape, and also is related to the word wit, which meant wisdom. So if you put those two concepts together, it's to bend or shape with wisdom.
May the love of the goddess be in your heart.
It is not some interesting idea or some people who want to go off and do some offbeat thing.
Barbara McGraw was once a practicing attorney with a major law firm in Manhattan. Feeling the need for something more spiritual in her life, she renounced her career and became a follower of Wicca, the way of the witch.
So there's this tendency in our culture to see God as being outside of the world, someone that's looking down and judging and punishing, and that if we do good, then we can go somewhere else which is better. A witch's perspective is that this is the divine plane. This, where we are right here and now, this is sacred. And it's only our tendency to divide as human beings our perception of things that makes us see some things as sacred and some things as mundane. The reality is that it is all sacred. This is it.
On this solstice, we celebrate the longest day when light triumphs. The sun, full grown, embraces the earth in the love that is most full and fruitful.
Guardians, spirits, elements of the south, we ask you to come here on this hot midsummer day and heal us with your radiant warmth. Come.
I sort of think of Wicca as being sort of the opposite of Buddhism. Buddhism is about ridding yourself of desire, and Wicca is more a religion of desire. The whole purpose of existence is joy. And if you think about it, most suffering is caused by people. and what people call evil is caused by other people. So by seeing the sacred as here and now, there is more of a focus on trying to bring more community here, trying to recognize everyone on the planet as your neighbor.
But if these are the sentiments of witches, how did we get to this? Traditionally, the witch of lore and legend is a terrifying entity, the quintessential embodiment of evil. Immortalized in 1,000 myths and fairy tales, she is the specter of night, the pillager of dreams, the tormentor of innocent souls. She is the one who lurks in the deepest places of our innermost fears. But what do we really know of this caster of spells and cohort of the devil? How did she come to haunt our dreams and our legends so strangely?
The stereotypical witch emerged from a village environment. She was poor. She was elderly. She was often a widow. She was, for all these reasons, on the margins of society.
The real story of the witch is a tragic one, underlined by some of the darkest days in human history. Our conception of her is a corruption of something ancient, of something more profound than anything conjured in the imaginative minds of the Brothers Grimm and other tellers of children's tales.
Through the centuries, there have been so many misconceptions about witches. The green-faced warded hag that wears the conical hat, the night flyer, the sorceress or sorcerer who works as the devil's consort. There are many negative connotations and myths about witches, but I will assure you that all are very untrue.
It is in the distant myths of ancient times that we find the true origin of the witch. At the beginning of the human story came the first yearnings to find meaning in a world filled with mystery. Life was ruled by powerful and incomprehensible forces. They came as life-sustaining cycles and seasons in nature, as changing patterns in the stars, and sometimes as unpredictable agents of destruction, bringing floods and famine. The human quest for order and a desire to make sense of the world gave birth to a search for higher powers, to a quest for something divine. At first, these powers were seen to reside in the sun and moon, in fire, water, and wind. But as time went on, the divine took on a personality independent from nature and was recognized as a god. Archaeology has revealed that throughout Europe and the Near East, primitive societies once revered a deity that was essentially female. She was associated with birth, with abundance, with the creative powers of women. She was omniscient, sacred, and the channel through which people could connect with nature's great bounty.
In the earliest of days, we revered our Earth Mother, doing her bidding as she, in turn, embraced us. In that time, we were, man and woman, equal in the sight of the goddess. Her spirit guided us through time and through seasons, sustaining us as we followed her example, filling the earth with compassion, cherishing all living things, and remaining close to the grasses and the trees and the forests as they whispered to us their secrets.
There is this ancient association of femaleness and sacrality that we can trace back thousands and thousands of years. In those ancient societies, there is also evidence that these were probably more egalitarian societies, in which men and women both are valued and both have access to positions of honor in society.
Women in that time possessed the power of knowing their own being, their worth. So the magical, scientific, if you will, and religious aspects of life were combined.
As the centuries passed, those who extolled the Mother Goddess saw her in three distinct phases.
In the beginning, she's a young maiden, she's virginal, she's just beginning to live her life. There's so much to learn, and she's learning.
The mother who perpetuates and continues life. Even if you do not have children, you are the mother, because you're more creative at that time.
The crone is in the later life, and this is the image that people see on Halloween that's so misconstrued as being like the evil wicked witch, when really it's kind of like, you know, mother time instead of father time. She's the old wise woman of the tradition. She's the one who has lived a whole life and has the experience of wisdom, and who can draw on the unconscious and impart that to her sisters and brothers.
Compared to prehistoric times when the mother goddess reigned supreme, by the Middle Ages women's functions began to change. Warfare and militant systems of government had placed men firmly in power. Now, relegated to positions of subservience, women found their traditional places challenged. Once the healers, brewers of remedial tonics for the ill and afflicted, and especially as society's midwives, women's social roles were becoming extremely tenuous, if not disappearing altogether.
There were no obstetricians in those days. There were, of course, physicians, but no physician would get his hands dirty. That was an intellectual job, not a hands-on job. The midwife was usually untrained in a formal sense, although generally she had a considerable apprenticeship and informal training, having been prepared by her predecessors in the community.
What happens in the late Middle Ages is, of course, that men begin to move into the field of healing and reproduction as the rise of what we will call medicine begins to emerge, and men begin to claim these powers, and at least part of this is linked to the authority of the church.
With the arrival of the 14th century, bold new ideas had burst onto the scene. Art, music, and architecture now flourished. Europe was in breathtaking transformation. The followers of Wicca shared in little of the social changes that swept across the continent, remaining content as healers and midwives and continuing to practice their pagan rituals. But for them, change was indeed written in the wind, for another presence now dominated the landscape. As Europe blossoms under the creative energies of the Renaissance, an indomitable power looms over the 14th century. Of all the institutions that regulated life, the Church was supreme. Most peoples had long converted from paganism to Christianity, but in many rural areas the practice of Wicca continued.
Women may have carried on some of these more ancient pagan traditions. If you have a new religion, Christianity, that is identifying women as evil, as dangerous, as subhuman, it's not surprising that women may have found these more ancient traditions rather appealing. So women very well may have continued these more ancient so-called pagan practices alongside Christianity.
Our Earth Mother has brought nourishment to the tired lands, following the long, dark winter. The fields bristle with new life, and we celebrate the return of summer. As dusk fell upon our village last night, the goddess brought her countenance to shine upon the homestead of the Hauptmann family, a healthy young son. 2 midwives were in attendance, and mother and child both thrive. There is much rejoicing today. Yet I have detected suspicion in the eyes of the village elders as they watch us gather in the forests to praise the earth and its ruling spirit. My sisters and I pray that there is no malice in the hearts of our neighbors, that we may continue to serve the goddess as our grandmothers did, and as their mothers did before them.
A world where disasters of all kinds were everyday events. It was natural and expected that one might try to identify the source of evil in terms of somebody in the community.
Despite church and society's increasing intolerance of their pagan rituals, the witches continued to practice their ancient ways, invoking the spirit of the goddess and reaping the rich harvest of nature's bounty to brew their potions and remedies. The tradition continues even now. Salem witch Marie Guerrero is a strong believer in the same herbal medications used over the centuries by the followers of the old religions.
If I'm having an enormous headache, I might say, well, it's time for some feverfew. If I'm feeling sluggish in a sexual way, I might brew some Damiana tea. It's an aphrodisiac. You know, if someone has a sore throat, well, you can rest assured that slippery elm is going to be brewing as a tea. You know, so there are all kinds of little things that I can concoct and come up with.
But magic too exists in the world of modern witches.
The immediate family that I learned a lot from was my mother. The magic of the world for her was in the wind. We prayed on the wind.
Z. Budapest was a child when she escaped the communist country whose name she now honors as her own. An acknowledged leader in Wiccan folklore, her tradition is based on the firm belief of magic in the world.
My mother would walk into an open window, and then she would talk to the wind in her backyard, and when she called the winds, they would come.
To a witch, the world is filled with magic. Knowing the correct incantations and prayers provides access to nature's powers. Because for the witch, magic is nothing more than the inherent forces within nature itself.
A lot of people misunderstand this whole idea of what magic is. What it really is a calling on, harnessing of the forces of nature. This harnessing of nature by a witch is, in essence, a prayer. With this, what we do is we actually call, almost in a demanding way, come and please heal my husband, my daughter, whoever it is.
To heal others is one of the most impassioned convictions of a modern witch.
I draw down from the universe the energies of the god and the goddess
to come into this sacred space and do this healing, so mote it be.
When I'm fortunate enough to be the priestess who's leading the magic circle, I feel connected to all things. I feel a part of all things. It's like a letting go. Everyone needs that experience.
Praying for harmony, the group acts as a channel for psychic energies directed at the patient.
Healing is one of the most important things that we study. It's done with using the senses. It's done with, looking at the inner person. You're fine-tuning your senses. And I know what I must tell this person. I know what's going on. And then all of a sudden, a week later, this person has listened to you and said, I'm going to go to the doctor, and then comes back and says, you know what? You were right.
5,000 miles and an ocean away, other followers of the ancient religions prepare to play out a ritual thousands of years old deep in the hills of Ireland.
The witch's power is the natural power of the universe. When you become a witch, the first thing you learn is that it hurts. You can burn your fingers with it. Therefore, you use it wisely. You use it to heal the sick. You use it to make positive changes in your life, in your friends' lives, and in the environment around you. If you use it destructively, it comes back on you. It returns to you. And when it does, you suffer the full penalty. This is where we believe that you pay for your sins now, not once you are dead.
Janet Farrar and her group in Southern Ireland follow a Celtic tradition of witchcraft. Their pagan pathway embraces the folklore and mythology of the British Isles, with occasional reenactments of events from local history.
Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies the leafy island where flapping herons wait the drowsy water rats. There they hid their fairy vats full of berries and of reddest stolen cherries.
I am the madam, I am the child, I am the golden brown, I am the perpetual let's cry.
When I first became involved in the craft, I expected a negative reaction from my family. I was surprised and delighted. My friends accepted it, my neighbours accepted it. It became the local cousin. And the local parish priest turned up on the doorstep one year and he said, I don't know what you people do at this time of year, but have a good one anyway. So we said, well, have the same yourself. And now we are known as the Witches of Ireland.
But unlike their modern counterparts, neighbors in the Middle Ages were not so accepting. Slowly, religious intolerance began to rear its head. One of the earliest recorded incidents of anti-witch sentiment in Europe dates back to the 9th century. In France, 3 men and a woman were accused of summoning up a storm at sea, a crime for which many witches would be blamed during the ensuing centuries. Attacked by a mob, the 3 were accused of consorting with the devil and doing his evil bidding. Quoting a biblical text condemning witchcraft, the mob demanded vengeance.
I will destroy the cities of your land and tear down all your strongholds. I will destroy your witchcraft, and you will no longer cast spells. The Book of Micah 5:3.
So Europe savored its first bitter taste of things to come. From that moment on, anti-witch sentiment lurked silently yet resolutely deep within the consciousness of the people. In some communities, the topics of sin, repentance, and the frailty of human mortality were often preached from the pulpit, creating an obsessive fear of the afterlife. Anxieties about death were heightened when natural disasters struck, and none more so than the bubonic plague epidemic that swept through Europe in the early 1300s, decimating more than 20% of the population. Seeking a human cause for the devastating disease known as the Black Death, the survivors often sought a scapegoat. Among those suspected of summoning forces of evil that brought on the plague were the followers of pagan religions, creating an even greater public suspicion of witchcraft. The Spanish Inquisition against Jews and Muslims began in 1478, followed by the Roman Catholic campaign against heretics 70 years later. With ruthless zeal, non-believers and dissenters were rooted out and burned at the stake. But that would only be the beginning.
Churchmen grew increasingly concerned that magic was becoming a kind of counterforce to Christianity. And so leaders of the church began to call attention to this as a real danger. The other element that needs to be added is the impulse to try to uplift humanity in a spiritual sense. This meant that they went out into the villages of Europe and they tried to convert the peasants who had barely a smattering of Christian education. So there was a kind of cultural clash. Now, what these missionaries discovered was a widespread belief in sorcery. And when they looked at it, the only way they could explain it was in terms of Satan. And they were determined to root him out. Particular individuals, then, were identified as Satan's servants. These are what we call the witches. And they were the ones who were most likely to be accused and, in many cases, executed.
Increasingly, the Bible itself became the tool of accusation.
Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Exodus 22:18.
O great Mother, it is no longer safe for us to leave our homes. All we wanted was to cherish the earth and praise you. Yet we have been brandished as cohorts of evil demons, admonished for 1,000 sins we did not commit. Since the rising of the last moon, the inquisitors have come into the village and carried away 7 of our sisters, all of whom have perished in flame. We can no longer embrace you in ritual, goddess of compassion and mercy, and it is not secure for us to proclaim our love for you. All that we do is construed against us.
One of the most dangerous occupations of the day was the role of the midwife. Imagine the psychology of a mother who has lost a child in childbirth. The evidence of the witch trials seems to indicate that when an infant death occurred, they would often look to the midwife and lead to the conclusion that she had a pact with the devil.
One of the things I think we have to keep in mind about the Middle Ages is that the notion of separation of church and state is not operative at this time. The church is the state is the church. Witchcraft is therefore not just a religious crime, it is a capital offense against the state. Therefore, the need to identify witches, to try witches, to weed them out of society is perceived as not just sort of a religious endeavor, it's an endeavor that is necessary to the whole of society for its own good.
In 1486, a do-it-yourself manual for identifying witches was published. Endorsed by Pope Innocent VIII, it was known as the Malleus Maleficarum.
Literally translated into English, it means something like the hammer against witches. And it was used to hammer at these poor women who were accused, and occasionally men.
Over the next 2 centuries, 30 editions of the book were published. Using its guidelines, anyone could easily identify and accuse a witch. Passages in the text were often brutal and intolerant, especially of women.
What else is a woman but a foe to friendship? They are evil, lecherous, vain, lustful, vindictive. Seek them out by finding the devil's teeth and claw marks upon her skin, by locating the devil's teat on which she suckles her demon consorts, by her moles, her blemishes and scars that are the marks of Satan.
It gave instructions on how to torture witches, how to get confessions. It was believed that any confession got without torture couldn't be trusted, because if you didn't torture someone, they might just tell you anything so you would leave them alone. So you had to torture anybody accused of witchcraft to make sure they were telling you the absolute truth.
One of the first things that would be done would be to strip her naked, either in front of her family or sometimes and oftentimes in the public square.
Bound head to foot and thrust into a stream, it was said that if a woman floated, she was a witch. It was believed that her innocence could only be proven if she sank and drowned. If she was prodded with a sharp instrument and did not bleed or showed no pain, she was guilty of being possessed by a demon spirit.
They would take knives and poke her wherever they found, some kind of marking on her body, like a mole or a freckle. And if the woman screamed out, it was considered to be evidence that she was a witch. There is a passage in the Malleus Maleficarum that I read where it talked about how the inquisitors should be careful not to look into the eyes of the witch, because they might be swayed by her spell to have pity on her. So in other words, they were not to look into her eyes and see her as a real human being at all.
With the publication of the sinister Malleus Maleficarum, the witch hunters were unstoppable. The flames of hysteria would fan to an inferno. It is the late 16th century. Much of Europe is ravaged by the horrors of what has come to be known as the Burning Time, the ruthless hunting down and execution of witches by burning them alive at the stake. But so far, some areas have escaped the terror and turmoil. The sleepy little village of Dillingen in Bavaria is one such place. Living alone on the outskirts of town is an elderly widow who supports herself by midwifery. 10 years earlier, the baby of one of her parents died while being born. Now the death has come back to haunt her, as witch hunt fever arrives at the very threshold of Dillingen. Caught up in the bloodlust spreading through all of southern Germany, troublemakers began accusing her of the child's murder through witchcraft. She is to become only one of hundreds of thousands and perhaps even millions accused of doing the devil's work. Yet, unlike most, history has preserved the old widow's name, Frau Hausmannen, commonly remembered as Walpurga, the witch. In keeping with the trend, the witch hunt often starts in the dark silence of night, to those huddled within the security of their homes.
Imagine yourself as a woman, living alone somewhere in a cottage. Maybe you have a cat as a pet. Your household accoutrements are around you, a broom to sweep the ashes with, a knife to cut your vegetables and skin your rabbits with. And you've lived this way for so long that the fear is there, out there, somewhere in the darkness is the witchfinder. Somewhere out in the darkness is somebody who does not like you. And then the knock comes to the door in the middle of the night. You hear the sound of villagers. Somebody has pointed the finger at you. And you know that you are going to face the witchfinder. You are going to be publicly humiliated, probably stripped naked while they search for a witch mark with their witch prickers. You have flea bites because you're not very clean, and one of those flea bites might just be the devil's mark. That's what you're going to be told. And you know about these witch prickers. They're terrible long needles that they stick into you. What you don't know is they're a trick. They have a retractable blade. And the witchfinder says, look, she feels no pain and draws no blood. She is a witch. That's the fear you would have lived with in the Middle Ages. That is the fear that would have kept your heart beating when you heard the knock on the door at night.
Called before her inquisitors, Walpurga Hausmannen is accused of murdering more than 40 babies, 2 mothers, and of using witchcraft to kill a horse, numerous geese, and a number of pigs. Some of the villagers even blame her for causing 3 adults to die in a hailstorm that she once conjured up by an evil spell. Under grueling torture, Hausmannen confesses her guilt to these sins, but her trial records clearly downplay the persuasive humiliation to which she is subjected. Upon kindly questioning, she confessed to us these appalling acts of abomination. Tortured cruelly, Hausmannen breaks down and admits to anything her accusers want her to say.
Under torture, people admitted to wrongdoing. They admitted to participating in the forbidden rites with Satan and using the power that the devil had given them to cause harm to their neighbors. Why did they do this? They realized at a certain point that the pain was unbearable, so they couldn't withstand it any longer. Another explanation, which makes excellent sense given the psychology of the time, is that having experienced the pain of the torture, they concluded, in fact, in their own mind, that they were really guilty. And there are many cases on record in which people willingly went to the torture, convinced that it would exonerate them. And when they discovered, on the contrary, that they were feeling excruciating pain and felt compelled to confess, many times we know from their later accounts that they confessed because they were convinced that in fact they were guilty.
Walpurga Hausmannen also confesses to seducing a young man 30 years earlier, following the death of her husband. Under torture, she agrees to the allegation he was not really human, but a demon pretending to be a man.
The church has a lot of negative attitudes towards sexuality, what I often call a sex-phobic attitude. And women are seen as particularly susceptible to all forms of temptation.
The first victims of the witch craze were the old women who were without protection. And they tend to own land because they outlived their husbands they inherited. The church wanted the lands. They had no one to stand up for them. So for that reason, she would be accused of witchcraft and she would be tortured. She would probably die after the day. Nobody came home.
There were towns in Germany in particular where there were no women left after the inquisitors came through. Everyone was killed. Now, there's been many different estimates of how many people were killed, and I've heard estimates as low as a few 100,000 all the way to 9 million. But it's difficult to count because not only the the people who were actually burned at the stake should be counted. But those who died in prison, those who committed suicide to avoid this, those women who threw themselves into the ocean in groups to avoid it.
Finding the mark of the devil beneath her left shoulder, the inquisitors and townsfolk of Dillingen condemn Walpurgia Hausmann to death, guilty of murder, of preparing evil spells against her neighbors, of indulging in carnal relations with the devil, of flaunting her sexuality before men. Hausmannen will burn to death, but not before men. Hausmannen will burn to death, but not before her breasts and arms are mutilated with red-hot irons, and her right hand severed. Only then is she tied to the stake and burned alive. Her pathetic cries for mercy are unheard. Her echoes, joining the rising tide of anguished screams and cinders that fill the blackened skies above Europe.
It's very important to us to reclaim the word witch because of the people that died during the burning times. If we don't remember that, then that kind of religious persecution can happen again.
When I walk about here, I remember the witches who were burned and drowned and tortured, how they embraced death, how they rushed into the ocean to kill themselves in order to avoid the Inquisition. Their names are nowhere here to be seen, but I know they are together with all these people somewhere in a happy place. The world will know who we were. Goddess of the earth, she who gives us life and takes us back again. Here lie our bones that belong to you. I dedicated my life to this cause, and I shall continue until I join these bones in the ground. Bless the living and bless the dead. Blessed be.
The fires raged for 3 centuries. By the end of the 17th century, the terror of the European witch trials had subsided. A new mood had taken over, one that drove nations to explore and expand, to navigate wider horizons.
We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return.
There are now approximately 200,000 practicing witches in the United States, and about an equal number worldwide. While men are also attracted to the religion of the witch, about 60% of witches are females.
Hello.
As an attorney, Los Angeles-based Barbara Morrigan is a relatively recent recruit to the spiritual pathway of the witch.
There was really nothing in my childhood that would lead anyone to think that I would have ended up being a witch. I wasn't looking to join any group, do anything. I had a spiritual epiphany. I was riding in the car with a friend, and my friend said to me, "Have you ever heard anything about the goddess?" And I said, "No," but I was really struck by this, and so I started exploring this. On the next full moon, I wrapped myself in a white sheet in my backyard, and the moon was full, and I lit a candle, and I looked up at the moon, and I said, Goddess, here I am. And I had this overwhelming feeling of being fully embraced and being accepted by her. And after that, my whole entire life started to change. And I started going to rituals that were being done by the goddess community, and they called themselves witches. And that was when I found out that Wicca is a religion where the goddess is the primary deity.
The call of the goddess is strong to those who hear her, and each of her followers responds in her own unique way.
Wicca is the only religion I have come across personally that has taken away any fear of what lies beyond. Most religions give you a faith in what lies beyond. Paganism gives you a certainty.
Untold seasons have ridden the winds of time. Centuries have unfolded, and the world has changed. Since the dark days of persecution and oppression almost annihilated those who followed our ancient beliefs, we, the daughters of the goddess, gatekeepers of her spiritual path, are once more graced with peace. Ignorance of our ways has been supplanted by tolerance. For this we are grateful, and we go gladly toward endless new dawns. In humility, we rededicate ourselves to our cause, to cherish the earth, to honor the riches of its natural heritage, to revere all life.
If we don't start to see the earth as sacred as she is, then we continue to do things that to her that might eventually destroy her altogether. And so, in a way, this is the idea of reclaiming the goddess in the ancient goddess religions is connected very much with healing the planet.
We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return, like a drop of rain.